Good morning. We continue our journey in Hemshech Samach Vav. And we've begun the sixth mimer, the sixth discourse, by Chulu, page 57. After learning the opening of the discourse, which is on the Pasuk Vayechula Shamayim, and the questions that the Rebbe Rashab asked, namely, was he brought the medrash that was cited earlier. L'chol tichla re'isi kates. For every end there is a beginning. And whereas mitzvahs, rechava mitzvahs chama'oid, are infinite. And then that's where the medrash says that everything has measure and parameters, heaven and earth, chutz medavar echad, except one thing that does not have parameters, that's Torah. And the Rebbe Rashab asked a question, then responded, and then asked a follow-up. The question was, what does that mean? We see that in existence there are levels that are Ein Sof and Bli Gvul. There's Gam Ken Shachas. Like we know that the whole existence comes from the Ratzon, Hashem, the desire of God. The desire of God is not finite. So you have to say, he says, that the difference is whether that infinity of God's desire manifests itself and extends itself and is revealed down below. That the world in existence, the Ratzon, the Elamus, even though it's Bli Gvul, nevertheless, it does not extend, it does not express itself in an infinite way down in existence. Whereas the Ratzon for Torah Mitzvahs is Ein Sof v'tichla l'mshachasan. As they manifest, it also manifests in an infinite way. But then the Rebbe Rashab asked the question, being that the Ratzon for existence, God's desire for existence, is Bli Gvul, is an infinite one, why indeed is there a limit in how much it extends itself? That's how he phrased the question. And that's where it remained, and said to understand that, we'll preface what we began learning earlier, the difference between Keser and the other spheres. What's the difference? Keser is already some form of manifestation, but it's still a state of concealed state, and it's still a makif. It remains removed. Why? Because all it is an expression of the one who has the desire. That's what Keser is. Even though it's nimshach, it's amshach, and alemus, it's not negili er. It's not a mitzias. You can't call it an entity yet. And for sure not a mahus acher. You can't call it another personality, another identity. Whereas the other spheres, even though they too are expressions of the divine, nevertheless, they are mitzias er, they have a mitzias, they have the defined definition, especially as they manifest in a container. You can call it a mahus acher, another identity, another personality, another entity. Okay, that's what a review of what was said earlier. The Rebbe Rashab is now going to continue the discussion about this level called Keser. In contrast, so in simple English, just keep in mind, it's essentially the contrast between the divine source, the Etzem, is completely beyond everything. Keser is God's way of expressing himself. That's why it's called Ratzon. It's his desire. The spheres are the actual expression, the expression of the structure of Chachma, Bina, the building blocks of existence. So if you were to use an example, let's say building a home, that God is of course the owner, so to speak, the one who conceives and is the one that wants to have a home. He then hires a chief of staff, you could say the main architect, the head contractor, that will express his will. That's his Ratzon, that's Keser. And then that Keser will in turn bring on board, well, I wouldn't say God brings everyone on board, but in turn, the next level of this process is the actual people, the actual artisans and craftsmen that will build the home. Whether it's the designers, whether it's the plumbers, whether it's the electricians, whether it's the bricklayers, and so on. And that one, each one has their department, Chachma, Bina, and so on. So in existence, the same idea. God is the master creator of it all. Ratzon is his so-called agent that expresses what he wants, and the spheres are the actual building blocks of existence. So we're going to be talking about the relationship between kesser, the ratzon, and the details of existence. Why? Because obviously the goal ultimately is to create an interface where we, in existence, ones who come and live in this home, can connect not just to the building blocks and not just to the desire, but all the way to the source itself. So each level here is critical, especially ratzon, because by connecting to the ratzon, you're connecting to the force that is expressing what God wants, his ultimate plan. In this case, is to make a dira b'tachtenim, a home for the divine in this lowest of worlds, and doing so through Torah mitzvahs, which is the primus haratzon of Hashem, the inner desire. So, with that said, we're now going to be talking about the relationship between the levels that are beyond physical, beyond time and space as we know it. Those are already the structure of existence, and that is what he calls kesser. So I'm going to read again from the beginning of the paragraph, the second paragraph on page 57. Pages can be found at samachvav.com. It says, "V'zeu atam," and this is going to be citing back from the Alter Rebbe's Maimer that these ideas have been based on the last few pages. And this is the reason. What is the reason? The fact that kesser is not etzem, but it's also not existence yet, because it's still just a pure mitzada atzmus. It's only an expression of the etzem. So this is the reason, Masha Keser, the whole parts of, that the kesser at every level, in every structure, like we said before, this Keser of Atzilus and Keser of every parts of every structure, it's higher than time. Because time, as we discussed more at length yesterday, time and space, but here specifically he's talking about time. It's higher than time. The structure of time is the parameters of existence. Past, present, future, time. So, l'fi erech, the parts of ahu, kesser, each level, in each structure, is higher than the conventional time structure of the time we'll call it time structure of that very structure. Tihini yadua. And this is why I gave the long introduction, because he's now going to explain it more. You're going to see in language of the levels in the shtalshlus. Like, where does zman begin? The idea of time and space, and we're going to be talking specifically about time. Tihini yadua, the zman hu b'Beriya. It's known that zman is in the world of Beriya. In other words, higher than Beriya, we don't call it time as we know it. We'll soon discuss what we do call it. There is a conceptual time, but zman is in Beriya, and you see it in the footnote. He takes us again to the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, zmanu b'Beriya. So Beriya, just to spell out what that means, Atzilus is the divine vision of existence. It's the beginning of the structure for sure, but it's like the structure that is still, from the perspective, it's not ratzon anymore. It's chachma, bina, and so on, Atzilus, but it's chachma and bina that are completely permeated with the divine within them. In Beriya, the structure begins to take shape, and zman therefore is in Beriya. V'azman deshita alfa shnin. So we know the Gemara says that God created the world in a structure of 6,000 years, 6 millennia. We're now in the 6th millennium. We're in the year 5,786. That's the 6th millennium. So, Vazman deshita alfashin humascholas hisavis habriya. So where do you begin counting the beginning of the 6,000? So it's from the beginning of the world of Beriya. Leima Atzilus. Beriya is creation. Beriya is bara. Atzilus is not where we don't start counting time, the structure of the 6th millennium before Beriya. We don't count the 6,000 from when the Atzilus Elyon, the higher Atzilus, was imparted or was or emanated. It begins in the world of Beriya. So in the spiritual world, so to speak, if you think about where it originates from, the world of Beriya is the origination of where time begins. It's not physical time there yet, but it's time in a structured way. And we'll soon discuss what exactly that means. Ki Atzilus u'lamayla ma'azman. In this context, there's the same footnote, Atzilus is considered higher than time. And that's why we don't count time from the emanation of the world of Atzilus. Being that it's above time, Beriya dafke from Beriya. Let me explain what this means. Yesterday, I gave an introduction about time, physical time, conceptual time, and even higher than that. So time we know is a structure, as we know it, past, present, and future. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. That's time. And it's completely understood by each one of us. We live in that world. We live in that type of existence. We know it was yesterday. It was Tuesday. Today is Wednesday. Tomorrow's Thursday. Now is 9:45 New York time. Whatever the time is at by you, wherever you may be in your time zone, the time ticks, the clock moves, and time rolls on. That's how we understand time. And that's how we measure it. We have our calendars and so on. When you say something is l'mayla mizman, what does that even mean? What means l'mayla mizman? It means it's not defined by a particular time. Like you'll say, I have an appointment today at 10 o'clock. Okay, it's 10 o'clock, not 11 o'clock. Things are happening in time. But let's say someone says to you, do you love your children? What time do you love your children? You're going to say, I love them all the time. It's an eternal love, 24/7. Doesn't mean that you feel it and are conscious every second, but in concept, it's always there. Someone says 2 + 2 = 4. Which time is that true? The answer is it's an eternal truth. Eternal in this world. We're not talking about eternal in the highest levels necessarily. But in the world of our existence, of logic, there are things that are not bound by time. When it comes to, for example, mitzvahs, there are mitzvahs that are bound by time. Shabbos. Pesach is coming soon. It's a particular 7-8 days, and that's that. And there are laws in those days. The day before Pesach, those laws don't apply. Davening, we daven Shachris at a certain time of day, Mincha a certain time, Ma'ariv. But then there are mitzvahs that are timeless. Loving God is a timeless mitzvah. Knowing God. There are mitzvahs that are called mitzvahs tmidies. You're always obligated to do that. You're always obligated to be a mensch. You're not always obligated to be eating matzah. I'm just pointing out that even in our existence, there are things that are bound by time bound, what we call mitzvah shazman grama. A mitzvah shazman grama is a time-bound mitzvah. It's connected to a particular time. A mitzvah she'ein hazman grama is a mitzvah that's not bound by any particular time. You can give tzedakah any time. And other such mitzvahs. So when we say zman and l'mayla mazman, in our world, we have examples. But when you talk about the creation of existence, when God first put it all in place, remember, time is a creation. Time is not always there. By definition, time means it wasn't always there, because time means there's a beginning, a middle, an end, a before, a now, and after, present, past, present, future. So in the Kabbalistic and Hasidic terminology, the question is, where the construct, what we call zman, time, where does it belong? There's a big seder shtalshus. Let's talk lifnei atzimtzum. Ein sof lifnei atzimtzum is a state of all-pervasive divine consciousness. There's no structure at all there. There's definitely no time and space. There's not even definitions. You don't even have the concept of chachma or bina. Even ratzon is there, but it's still all very conceptual. So you can't speak about time and space in Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. How about after the Tzimtzum? So here's where the world, these dimensions, what we call worlds, come into play. The world of Atzilus, like he's saying now, is still considered an above time state. Because Atzilus are eternal archetypes of the divine attributes, Chachma, Bina, and Das, and so on.
It's hard for us to understand it. an
let
hour
me
away.
finish. That's why let me just explain as best as I can. That's why I'm here to explain. When we say time, when we say that time begins somewhere, we call that it begins in Beriya. Atzilus is considered still a spiritual, you can call it timeless state. It's not completely timeless, as we're going to soon learn, because there was a time that Atzilus doesn't exist either. Atzilus is not eternal, meaning only Atzmus is completely eternal. But in Ishtalshlus itself, there are things that are not yet bound by the structure. I'm going to go back to the example I gave of building a home. So when you envision you want to build a home for yourself. You can envision that home in your mind. On one hand, you could say, I'm envisioning a home. But is that really defined? It's definitely not defined because it hasn't been built yet. The parameters are not there. Even if you imagine that my home is going to be 5,000 square feet, for example, and it's going to have 10 rooms or 20 rooms or whatever it is, it's in your mind. It's all conceptual. And that you can be envisioning that outside of time and space in a way because you're just envisioning. But when you actually start building it, now you have a real structure happening and you have a deadline. So zman comes into play. When are we starting to build? Tomorrow. 1 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, the team is coming, we're starting to build. In your mind, when you envisioned it, it's not time bound. You can envision it 24/7, anytime you want, because it's just a concept. So in a sense, that would be like Atzilus looking at existence, conceptually speaking. Beriya is the beginning of the actual structure. Now, it's still a spiritual structure for the record, but it is a structure. And that's what we say zman is in Beriya. That there is a dimension where you can say it has begun, the process of creation has begun. So when we say Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz, what are we saying? What was right before Bereshis? So as we're going to learn in a moment, there is no before. So you have to think of it in terms of something that is not bound by time. Right now, whatever was before Bereshis is there right now as well. Eirei sof lifnei hatzimtzum exists right now as well. It just doesn't exist in our plane, on our dimension. We're just seeing one little detail of a big, big picture. So you're living wherever you're living, you look out your window or you look at your home, how far can you see? A mile, 2 miles. You go on the roof, you can see more, but it's all limited. So someone will say to you, is that the whole world? What you see with your eyes? You'll say, no, there's a much bigger world. I only can see a limited part of it. Or if you're standing on a plateau, someone will say, what does the horizon look like? You'll give a definition. You go up on top of the mountain, you have a whole different perspective. You'll have the whole horizon. So let's take this a little further. If I said to you, when you're top of the mountain, do you see everything? I see what I can see. Even if you had a bird's eye view of all of existence, and someone will say to you, can you see it all? Again, you see what you can see. But even hypothetically, let's, for example, say that you were able to have an imaginary telescope that could see from one end of existence to the other end of existence. Hypothetically, whatever that would mean. I would say to you, is that everything that exists? So, of course, you're going to answer no. For example, you're not going to see love. You're not going to see ideas. You're not going to see spiritual entities. Why? Because the eyes, even with the greatest telescope, you're only seeing physical space or physical time. So there's right away, you can imagine there are things. Remember the example I've given with a fisherman who spread his net on all the seas and he gathered different types of fish. And after all his research, he came to the conclusion, after analyzing and measuring and so on, there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. Wow, what a revelation. He's about to make a big announcement. His little daughter comes to him and says, what do you mean, Daddy? We have a fish tank in our house, and there are little goldfish that are shorter than a half-inch long. So, of course, how did he come to such a conclusion? The answer is they look at the net that he used, the instrument he used. The net had spaces of half-inch spaces. So, of course, all the fish that are shorter than half-inch fell back into the water. So basically, everything we know is through the instruments we use. If the instrument is limited, it won't exist. Fish that are shorter than half-inch long will never be caught by a net that has half-inch spaces. So the same idea, physical eyes. Even the most powerful telescope will only see what a human being can physically see. So the idea of other realities exist absolutely. You will never see your soul. You will never see love. I'm talking about with your physical eyes. You can see the expression of it, but the actual entity, your body, you can see with your eyes, with your five senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. But all of us understand there's all kinds of realities, and actually higher realities and deeper ones that are not defined by this net that we have, by our limited instruments. So when we say that time has a beginning, so to speak, Bereshis bara, we're simply saying existence as we know it in time and space is based on the tools we have. But since we have a soul, and our soul comes from levels that are higher than the human structure, than the defined structure of existence, we could envision as something that is higher than time and space. So we talk about Avram Avinu, let's say. Okay? Avram Avinu lived almost 4,000 years ago, a little less, 3,800 years ago. We read about him in Chumash. He lived, he passed away. He's on this earth, he does not exist for many, many years. And yet we live with his legacy. We live with his morals, with his values. What does that mean? That means that the physical Avram in time and space as we know it lived in a certain period in time, in a certain place on earth. But what he represented, we'll call it his spiritual message, the archetype that Avram is Keser, and Avram represents kindness and achras sarchim and guests, and everything Avram and Sarah represent. The same thing with Yitzchak. You would call that beyond time and space as we know it. You don't have to be where Avram lived to live by Avram's values. You don't have to be in his time and not in his space. What's happening? You're introducing a value that is not bound by time and space. Just to give examples. So when we say Bereshis bara Elokim, or what he calls here Elam HaBriya, we're saying that time has a structure. And the structure of time begins in Elam HaBriya, or Bereshis bara, what we would call 5,786 years ago. However, that block called 5,786 is the net, is just the perspective of our existence. Beyond that, if someone said, what was there before? You'd say there's no before. It's a dimension that's there right now, that's here right now as well. It's just not bound by that structural element called time. In space, it's a little easier to understand, because you could say, my space that I'm standing in right now is not all of space, it's only my limited space. The same thing with time, it's your limited time. If you think about time and space in general, it's 5,786 years. It's Earth and everything you can see in that imaginary telescope that I described before. But that's all within the construct called time and space. That does not mean that there isn't realities, that there are no levels of reality that are beyond time and space. I gave a few examples of them. But ultimately, when you say God created existence, God, beyond time and space completely, created this construct called time and space. He gave it parameters, 6,000 years, millions or billions or trillions of miles of outer space. That's the parameters. And he could have made it in a way that my existence, God's existence, and this structure that I created have no relationship. But he wants a relationship. And that's why we're discussing this. Because we want to say, how can this construct of time and space, limited in its parameters, whether it's the parameters of time or the parameters of space, how could it connect to a divine that is beyond time and space? And that's why God created Hishtalshelus. And he said there's an Atzilus. Atzilus will give you the ability to get out of your construct of time and space and touch and reach a level that's beyond regular time and space. And we'll soon learn that Atzilus also is bound by parameters. And from that, you'll be able to move to the next level higher than Atzilus. All the way that you could ultimately create a fusion of beyond time and space in time and space. Basically, we're not limited. At the end of the day, we won't be limited just by the moment that we live in. We can take a moment and make it eternal. If you do a mitzvah in this second, even though it's only a fleeting second that would come and go, your mitzvah, like he says in Tanya, is yichud zeh nitzchi, l'mayla leilam vod. You have taken a moment, and that moment has become eternal because you've infused it with something eternal, as we'll soon learn. That mitzvahs and Torah are eternal, and you can make the temporary time and space, make it eternal. When you sanctify space, like a Beis HaMikdash, that space forever is changed. So you can sanctify time and space. Shabbos is time, Yom Tov is time, space are physical places. If you don't sanctify it, it becomes a limited space or time that comes and goes. So that's ultimately what we're discussing here. So the world of Beriya is where you could say the boundary of where time begins. Above Beriya is a level that is higher than time in the way we're discussing it now. And ultimately the goal is to bridge the two. But let's not talk about the bridge. Right now he's going to discuss the construct. Keser, he's basically saying, is going to be higher than Zman of any particular structure. The spheres are within that. Now he's introduced Beriya and Atzilus as Beriya being the beginning of time. We'll get to Atzilus and Keser of Atzilus a little later. But I just wanted to put it into context to be able to understand. Now, if you don't think about this a lot, it's hard to grasp because initially, as I said, we're programmed to think about time and space, period. We don't really think about things that are beyond time and space in a serious way because we don't have a handle on it. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around it. But that's why I gave this longer explanation that our existence, just remember, your existence is limited. Let me just use one more example before we continue inside. I always talk about, God forbid no one should ever know, but when people ask, where does a neshama go after Me'av Esrim Shana? After living in this world, the soul inside of a body. So people ask, where does the soul go to? I always was frustrated, didn't always have a way to answer that question. In my mind, in my heart, I knew the answer, but I didn't have the words. Until I came up with this ridiculous analogy, but it works also very well for what we're discussing right now. And you'll see right here the challenge that's required to understand it, to wrap our head around it. So I came up with this analogy. I've mentioned it many times. Imagine a conversation, a dialogue between a refrigerator and electricity. The refrigerator asks the electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? You know, while the electricity is running in the refrigerator is working, it's cooling and refrigerating the food and whatever is inside the refrigerator. Great. But when they pull the plug or they shut off the switch, where does the electricity go? That's what the refrigerator is asking. The electricity in turn responds with a certain level of incredulousness, and it says, what kind of chutzpah, what kind of question are you asking me? You're a little box, the refrigerator, that they just invented 100 or 200 years ago. You figured out how to generate electricity and draw it into the box, and now you think you're the center of existence, that you are where it's at, and you're asking me where I go as if I'm some type of novelty. I was here long before your box was ever invented, and I'll be here once you die, and once your box, once this appliance wears down, and no longer functions. I go back to my natural place, which was not bound by the time and space of your box. You only understand existence through the eyes of your box. That's all a refrigerator knows. So you're asking me where I go. But electricity, when it's not bound by any particular appliance, a light bulb, a refrigerator, an air conditioner, or any other appliance, the electricity is not bound by time and space as we know it. It's still bound by other levels of time and space, but not the refrigerator's perspective. What do you see from this? So when you say then, when people hear this, they say, of course, we are asking a question, where does a neshama go after the body, God forbid, passes away? The body is buried. Where does the soul go? Because for us, we only know the world of the body. Yes, we know there's a soul inside the body, but we wonder, like, where did the electricity go? Where does the soul go to? But then when you start thinking about it, it's the other way around. The soul was never bound by the parameters of time and space of the body. It's only the way we are trained to think. The soul was here before you were born. And the soul will be here even after the body is no longer here. For a period of time, 120 years, the soul was compelled to join the body like electricity inside of a refrigerator. it joins it completely. They're seamless. Hopefully, a person is a healthy person, soul inside of a body. But never think the soul became the body. The soul always remains an entity that's not bound by time and space as the body understands it. And when we start thinking about it, and we start learning chassidus about ruchnius, you start realizing, oh yeah, you know what? I am not a body with happened to be a soul in there somewhere. I'm a soul that happened to travel inside a body. It's like we say, we're not physical beings with having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. So the soul has been here from the beginning of time, or beyond even. When Hashem decided to send the soul to your parents, yes, He put a soul inside that body that was conceived by your father's seed, fertilizing your mother's egg. Something was conceived. The third partner, Hashem, blessed that union with a child, with a life, with a soul. The soul enters the body. They join. 9 months, they get to know each other, so to speak. The body develops. The soul in the body now, a newborn child. Never think that newborn child began there. The soul was here long before. But in our perspective, we're like the fishermen with a net. We only have limited vision. So we see what we see. But when you start learning, you start realizing, 1 second, we say every morning, what do we say? You've returned. Where did you return the soul from? Where did it come from? What do you mean you returned it? My soul is right now inside of me. Where was it before it was returned? Where was it at night? So we have to start learning chassidus, and it speaks from the medrash that the neshama at night goes back to its source and it drinks from the waters, the ruchnius dika waters, and then it comes down refreshed and returned to you. And then you say neshama shenasata bi, again, a neshama that you instilled within me, tahirahi, is pure. Ata barasa, beriya, ata yitzarta, yitzira, ata nefachta bi, asiya, ata meshamra bikirbi. What does all this mean? Think about it. You're going to say it, if you said it this morning already, you're going to say it. What are you talking about? Where's the soul? What is this? What are these levels here? The levels are a soul traveling through spiritual levels until it manifests within the body. Electricity traveling through levels to get inside the refrigerator. And now we think the refrigerator is the center of existence. It's not. It's right now where the soul should be, and that's what Hashem wants. Because that's how you do Torah mitzvah, through a neshama beguf. But don't ever think the guf is the ultimate arbiter and the ultimate decider of what's time and space. The guf could only know what it knows. So if you look with guf eyes, with the 5 senses of the body, you're going to see very little. You're only going to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell what your tools and instruments allow you to. You start looking through the eyes of the neshama, you start seeing other realities. 1 second. There's God's purpose in my life. There's higher levels. There's Beriya. There's Asiya, Yetzira, Beriya, Atzilus, higher. So really the discussion of time and space and beyond time and space is this difference between looking from a perspective of Beriya, that's where time begins, and in Atzilus, it's above time for all practical purposes right now. We'll soon learn, as I said, more about Atzilus. So when you say, where did it all begin? Bereshis bara, it's just like the beginning of a child's life. When was this child born? So I was born Hey Tevis. Whenever your birthday is, that's when you were born. When were you conceived? 9 months earlier. That's your Bereshis bara. Your personal Bereshis bara began when your life began. Before that, you can't count that as part of your life as you know it. But the neshama was around. The neshama was not bound by that time and space. Your neshama was here before you were born and before you were conceived. So when you say Bereshis bara on a macrocosmic level, it's like the birthday of the entire universe. I mean, the actual birthday is Rosh Hashanah when a human being was born, but technically, Chafei El, Nivra Elam, what was there before Chafei El? There was no Chav Dalet El. We only say that just for conceptual reasons. So that was the beginning. That's its beginning. The beginning of life, as you know it on this earth, is when you were conceived or when you were born, more practically speaking. Same thing with creation. It all began with Beriya. Beriya is Bereshis bara. Beyond that is a different type of experience that has to be discussed with other language. You can't talk in terms of before before, present, and after, past, present, and future. There you have to start talking neshama language. And neshama language is not bound by time and space as we know it. And that's the difficulty, because we are so accustomed to time and space as we know it, it's very hard for us to imagine something outside of it. But this is critical, because without this understanding, you're going to continue to have physical experiences only. You cannot understand a spiritual concept without this whole discussion here. So when we say, for example, after Gimel Tammuz, after the Istalkus of Atzadik, it says, Tzadikim gam b'misasan kruim chayim. A tzaddik, even in his death, is called alive. Rishoyim gam b'chayim kruim mesim. A Rasha, even in his lifetime, is called dead. Think about what that means. If you're talking about biological life and death, what do you mean? If you're physically alive, you're alive. A Rasha is alive. He's breathing, his heart is beating, he's functioning. But if you're talking about spiritual life, real life, no. He's physically, he's biologically, his body, his refrigerator is working. But is his electricity, is the neshama working properly? At tzaddik, even if the physical being is no longer here, but his neshama is alive in a very powerful way. It's affected people on this earth. So, even. He's considered even more alive, the Alter Rebbe brings. Why? Because he's not bound by the refrigerator anymore. He's not bound by the parameters of time and space as we know it. Now his effect is everywhere. The Alter Rebbe explains that Keser 27, the section 27. Point being is, it's all about getting a fresh new way of looking at things. And it's not an easy matter. Remember earlier we learned you have to erase. Sometimes Rabbi Zera had to fast in order to forget Talmud Bavli, to assume Talmud Yerushalmi. The Nahar Dinur and the Omud between one Gan Eden and another. In some ways, I'm not saying to that extreme, in some ways to start understanding this concept of time and space, Beriya, and that which is beyond, you need a certain erasing, a deleting of your hard drive as you understand physicality. Now, it doesn't require deleting it altogether, but you have to start thinking with different type of axioms and different rules to the game. Because time and space has its own rules, and beyond time and space has very different rules. And that's part of this whole discussion. I mean, I could have just read this quickly and just moved on, but I know many people read this, you just read a word and another word, Beriya, Atzilus, but I wanted to give it some proper explanation. As I said, this is very fundamental, but very, and it sounds complex, but the more you get used to understanding this, you come to realize. That's why I'm giving all the examples of a neshama, a guf, the temporary, the impermanent, the permanent, and so on. And again, keep in mind always, the goal is fusion. Ultimately, we want to bring l'mayla zmanim mokim into zmanim mokim. I'm going to give one final example for now. There'll be plenty more. I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything, and then we'll continue. One more example that you heard about a lot is tshuva. A person, God forbid, transgresses a sin, so you would think that's it. There's no, you can't change things. You can't change the past. If you hurt someone, you did something, it's broken. And yet we're told you can do tshuva. Now there's different levels of tshuva. The Gemara in Yuma says there's tshuva mekana lahaba. You did something wrong. That doesn't mean you can't repair it. You repair it, but it's only going forward. It's like you hurt someone and you make amends. You make up with them. You ask forgiveness. You find a way to reconcile. Good. But then he says there's tshuva ma'ava. Tshuva ma'ava, you can, also the mafreya. You can actually change the past. How's that possible? How can we change the past? The past is past. You can actually go back and rewire the situation like as if it never happened. So Chassidus explains only one way, because tshuva is l'mayla mizman. Tshuva can go back to the engine room. If you do deep enough tshuva, you can access levels that can actually change the past. How to explain exactly how it works, I'm not going to go into detail, but it's just giving an example where you're going to l'mayla mizman and bring it into zman. We learned it earlier. He gave the example of tshuva on this earlier. And we'll probably talk about it more later as well. We'll get back. But I just wanted to give another example to understand that even though we are bound by time and space, that does not mean we cannot in some ways access. And ultimately the goal is to access l'maylam zman, and bring it into zman amokim. And another example for that would be you sing a song. A song can transport you to another time and place. It can connect you with people. It can connect you to a time many years ago, but you're reliving it right now. What are you doing when you do that? You're accessing something that is not bound by technically time and space. The Rebbe speaks about technology. I believe I explained this once in one of the Sir, Mishpatim Tov Shemem Dalet. Technology does that. Technology allows us to transcend time and space, even though we're in different spaces and even time zones and so on. We can learn Torah together through technology. Technology bridges the span and the separation of time and space. The Rebbe used an exact example of a ruchnistic idea of ruchnius becoming stronger than gashmis, because gashmis is defined by time and space, and ruchnius is not quite. So all that is some examples for some of what we're learning. Getting back to the point, Zman begins in Beriya, above Beriya is Atzilus. And that's why we say Zman is Beriya, that the Shit Alfashin, the structure of time as we know it's 6,000, that parameter belongs in the world of Beriya, that's a structure. That doesn't mean there's nothing outside of that structure, but it is a structure. Okay. Let me now stop if anybody wants to ask anything, and then we'll continue learning.
That's a wonderful explanation, very fascinating. But the bottom line is that the tools are different. Not that the Zman is not existing before. We don't have the tools to recognize Zman in the way that is in a different way. But the concept of Zman is always. Make sense?
Yeah, we're going to learn more about that soon, what that means. Yeah, the tools are the critical point here, for sure. But he's soon going to see, you'll see that, but he does say that Atzilus is l'maylam zman. He doesn't say it's a different type of zman with different tools. So just keep that in mind. So right now, let's talk about zman as we know it. Ovar, heva, osid, past, present, and future. And that, Bereshis bara, is the beginning of zman. And before that, as we're going to learn, there's no zman. And we'll learn what there is. But let's first begin with this process. Because there are levels where there is no time at all. There are levels we're going to learn that there is a thing called spiritual time or conceptual time. But I don't want to go there yet. Let's right now, he's given, just like the world began, Bereshis bara l'kim space, time also began then. That's the key thing to remember right now.
Thank you.
And anything else will be confusing. So let's continue. Anybody want to ask anything about anything that I just said in the last while?
But the Zaman has to also start from Atzilut, because it says 1,000 years of us is one day.
But he said, right now he says no. He says there's no Zman. So l'maylam is Zman. You're bringing things that you learned elsewhere. Let's learn what he learns here, and then you'll ask questions afterwards. Right now he says Zman starts from Beriya, not from Atzilus.
Okay.
We'll learn. We're going to learn about Atzilus. Because you could ask the question, what is the root of Zman in Beriya, in Atzilus? Is there a root? There is a root. But he's not calling it Zman. We'll soon see what it's called. You know, just to give you a small example as well. Chesed is the root of water. Gvura is the root of fire. Now, if you look at Chesed, it doesn't look like water. And fire doesn't look like Gvura. And Chesed and Gvura are two archetypes. They're two attributes. Fire and water are two physical entities. So how do you explain that exactly? That's part of what we're going to be understanding as well. The way it manifests in our existence is time, like I said, like the refrigerator. Right now, here's where I am. There's a yesterday, there's a today, there's a tomorrow. That is in the world of Beriya. Beyond that is a different type of reality, which we'll learn about as we go. But let's continue learning with that in mind, step by step by step. I would advise not to bring things from other places right now because it'll just confuse you. Let's see how he explains time in this context. So he says like this. So, okay. And that's why Zman is not counted from Atzilus, because that's higher than time. 3 lines from the bottom of page 57. One second. And with this, says the Rebbe Rashab, is going to answer a question. Kushis HaChokrim. With this, we're going to answer the question of the Chokrim, the questions of the philosophers. In the footnote, he tells us who they are. Sefer Amunas V'Deis from Rab Sadia Gaon, and the Samach Tzedek cites it. The truth is, it's brought in other places as well, but that's a very prominent place. So what's their question? And what's the answer to their question? They question, Lama Nivra Ha'olam B'zeh Hazman V'lei B'zman HaKedim. Why was the world created at this time and not earlier? That's their question. Basically, if the question was asked today, why was the world created 5,786 years ago and not 5,800 years ago? Or 1,000,000 years ago? Or 1,000,000,000 years ago? That's their question. Let's just read it inside and then we'll discuss it. V'hainu lefnei shekedim, and the answer is v'hainu. The answer lefnei shekedim shenivraim lo yaya zman klal. Because before the creation, you can't ask a question why it wasn't created before. There was no before. There was no zman. You could ask before, for example, someone will say, why did you start building your house in the year 2026 or Tavshin Pei Vav and not Tavshin Pei Hey? No problem. They're both in the world of time. Why didn't you do it yesterday? Why are you doing it today? But there is no yesterday before creation. There's no time. And therefore, the whole question is not applicable to ask why it wasn't created earlier. There was no time. You can't ask why. There was no before. You can't ask about a before when there's no before. Ki'im, next page, 58. Time began in the beginning of creation. So whenever it is created, that's when time began. And there's no question about before. There is no before.
Before is a different level. It's a different.
It's not zman. Let's make it clear. He says clearly, the loy hoya zman. It's not my words. It's loy hoya zman. Period. There was no time. I'm learning this like a Ben Chomish Mikra. This is what the Rebbe Rashab says. I'm not bringing in any other ideas from other places. I'm going with this step by step by step.
You're making it very clear.
No, I'm trying to explain, but I'm just saying, he's not saying loy hoyazman gashmi. He says loy hoyazman. We'll soon discuss. I said, be patient. Just let's absorb right now and just listen. And you'll see you're going to get a very interesting picture. Okay, any questions? I'm going to go slowly here because it's a interesting, very fresh topic.
This is fascinating, even though, like you said, we don't know exactly what was before, how is an Atzman, but for now, this is fascinating. It makes it very clear, the boundaries, what is Zman and what is Loi Hoyer Zman.
Like I said, in space, it's easier. Like if someone said to you, you're living in a particular space. So I'll say to you, what's going on outside of your space? So you're living in your home. What's going on in someone else's home? Are other things going on? But let's say someone says to you, what's going on in a place where there is no space? What would be your answer? There is no space. Don't ask me what's going on in a place outside of space. The space of existence, like I said, is very large, but it's still finite. It's not infinite. If someone will say to you, what's going on, Lamaila, Mamokim, your answer would be, there is no Mokim going on there. Now, 1 second. That doesn't mean there's nothing happening there. It's just not a space as we understand space in a structured way. Like I mentioned before, you can love someone and it's not bound by space. You don't have to be in the same room with the person you love. You don't have to be in the same physical space. That doesn't mean there's no connection between. Again, we'll talk about spiritual space and conceptual space soon and time. Okay, let's continue. Top of page 58.
You could bring down here what the Alter Rebbe is saying in Tanya, that if somebody said that this is such a deep chokhmah that I cannot touch it, shekol hashomea yitzchak lo.
Yeah, because Bechal Nish Begeder, yeah. Exactly. Like you could say on something that's shaykh to be touched, you could say, I can't reach it. It's very high up, I can't touch it. But something like saying chachma, you can't touch it, is Bechal not in the same world. It's not in the world of Mishrash Bechal. Omnam, continuing, page 58, first line. Omnam k'moy kein yuvan ba'atzilus. Sheyesh be'gam kein abiyah. Now he's going to Atzilus. That's higher than Beriya. He says in Atzilus we can also understand this idea as well. And here he's going to speak about how Zman is in Atzilus. That in Atzilus you also have Abiyah. Remember, all the worlds, Iskalulus, encompass the others. So in Atzilus there's Atzilus Shabbat there's Beriya in Atzilus, there's Yitzir in Atzilus, there's Asiyah in Atzilus. Remember earlier he said Keser is Lamayla Mizman Lefi Apartzafahu. Lefi Erech Apartzafahu. So he says like this: what is Atzilus Shabbat Atzilus? Hainu b'chinas ha-Keser. Atzilus, within Atzilus, is called the level of Keser. The Chachma Bina hein Beriya Shabbat Atzilus. Chachma Bina are called the Beriya in the world of Atzilus. V'zah is Yetzirah. The level of Zah, the Midas of Atzilus, are the level of Yetzirah within Atzilus. Or Malchus, and Malchus of Atzilus is Asiyah Shabbat Atzilus. And Keser Atzilus, hu b'chinas Atzilus Shabbat Atzilus. Okay, so that's important. Now, he's going to apply what we just learned. We just said Zman begins in Beriya. And Atzilus is higher than Zman. In Atzilus itself, the Beriya Shabbat Atzilus, there's a level of Zman. And that Atzilus Shabbat Atzilus Keser is going to be higher than that. That's what he's going to know. So, like essentially in microcosm, the same idea. So he says like this: Hine inyan azman b'Atzilus hu mebchinas Beriya Shabbat Atzilus. Just like we said in general, it's the Beriya of Atzilus. And keep in mind, we're talking here, of course, spiritual levels. So this idea of microcosm, macrocosm is everywhere. We've talked about it many times. Everything is relative. Because you'll say, how does this stem? He just said, Zman begins in Beriya, not in Atzilus. That's correct. But Beriya is a dimension. Beriya is not a physical place. It's a dimension. So in Atzilus, in a subtle way, there's also a dimension called Beriya. And that's where Zman begins. V'lo b'chinas Zman mamish. However, it's not Zman mamish. And that's the important qualification. In the world of Beriya mamish, it's Zman mamish. And in the world of Atzilus, it's something relates to Zman. And of course, Atzilus Shabbat Atzilus Keser is even higher than that. Lo Zman mamish. So what then is it called? Ela b'chinas seder zmanim. So now he's introducing a new level. And that's why I wanted to do this slowly, because I didn't want to jump there. There's a thing called seder zmanim. Seder zmanim literally means the order of time. Not time, but the order of time. It's expression used in Sefer Ikrim. Let's see, they have the footnote. Let me see how they say it. Oh, yeah. The Medrash asks a question. It says that the world, he uses there the world, that Beina Ilamis, that before the world is created, the Eibishter created other worlds, Beina Ilamis umachrivan. So the Medrash asks, when did that happen? So it said that it happened, Seder Zmanim Kodim Lachein. That before time, as we know it, there was a thing called the order of time. That's what he's introducing now. So it's based on Breishis Rabbah. Let me just see something here. 1 second. Yeah. Okay, so Seder Zmanim, the order of time. I'm going to explain what that means, but let me just read inside to just see what he says, to see if he's going to explain it or I have to explain it. 1 second. No, he doesn't explain it here. So let me tell you what Seder Zmanim is. It's actually a letter that the Rebbe wrote before the Nesius. The Rebbe, someone asked the Rebbe about what is Zman and what is Seder Zman and so on. It's brought in Derech Mitzvah. Some of you have learned Derech Mitzvah may recall. So when you say the order of time, you could say put it in simple English, the concept of time. Remember, let's not talk about time for a moment. Let's talk about everything in existence. I mentioned before fire and water. And before that, I mentioned that's Keser and Gvura. What does that mean exactly? It means existence as we know it is an evolution of steps. Everything in this physical existence has so-called an archetype, a counterpart in a more spiritual level. I'm going to give a simple example for it. A few examples, because it's very important to understand this well. The first example, let's talk about simple physics. You see water. Talk about water. We know, you ask a scientist, and they'll say water is made up of molecules. And what are the molecules made up? Of elements. What are the elements? H2O. That's the chemical formula for water. H is oxygen, is hydrogen. 2O, H2, 2 parts of hydrogen to 1 part of oxygen. That's water. When you look at hydrogen and oxygen, you're not going to see water. But when they combine together and you take apart the water, it's made up of those elements. And those elements are made up of those molecules. Molecules are the building blocks, the smaller building blocks within hydrogen and within oxygen. You go further, the molecules are made up of even more minute particles. They're called atoms. And atoms are made up of subatomic particles. And today we know even further, you go quarks and subatomic particles. Is it a contradiction? Someone will say, I see a cup of water. I see a drop of water. Why are you telling me hydrogen, oxygen? Why are you telling me molecules, atoms, subatomic particles? The answer is, it's deeper levels. So, it may be a simpler example. It's raining outside, let's say. So most of us, it's raining outside, you put on a raincoat, an umbrella, whatever it is. You look at a weather report, a meteorologist will tell you the rain is a result of cloud formations and pressure systems and hot and low pressure systems over the oceans. When they join, they create clouds. The clouds in turn can create a storm. I'm saying these pressure systems can create a storm. We just had a blizzard in New York a few weeks ago. What exactly is a blizzard? What exactly is any storm? What's a hurricane? What's a volcano? So it's all about forces that we can't see with our eyes that are working behind the surface. When they combine in a certain way, what we will get is a blizzard or a hurricane or earthquake. In a human example, if someone, let's say, is very angry and seething inside, maybe something that hurt them, it goes back maybe years from childhood, ultimately it erupts in a burst of rage. You know, people have anger. Some people have difficulty with anger. Anger didn't come from nowhere. It's forces at work that ultimately erupt. So bottom line is, what we see is not what we get. What you see on the outside is just a surface expression. So water is much more than just water. Now, if you ask a makubal or a chassid, they'll tell you behind the subatomic particles that are behind the atoms, that are behind the molecules, that are behind the hydrogen, oxygen, lies a thing called chesed. Chesed is also a particle. However, it's a spiritual particle. And where does chesed originate from? Keser of Asiya originates from a more subtle and sublime level of chesed in Yetzirah. Keser of Yetzirah comes from Keser of Beriya, and Keser of Beriya comes from Atzilus. And if someone asks you, what's the difference in Atzilus, Beriya, Keser of Atzilus, Beriya, Yetzirah, and Asiya? Similar to the difference between molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles. Not mamish, because there it's physical. But it means it's a layer within a layer. And the higher you go, the more spiritual it is, the more divine it is. Keser and Atzilus, like Merkava. All it is God's right arm. Re'eh Yamina, what is the right arm? That God wants to extend chesed. It's God's chesed. In Beriya, chesed becomes already somewhat of an independent force. It's still divine chesed, but it's Beriya. In Yetzirah even more so. When we do chesed below, someone does kindness in Asiya and Gashmis, you're aligning your chesed with all these levels of Keser, all the way to Keser of Atzilus, and how Keser of Atzilus is manifesting in Keser of Asiyah. When you hand out tzedakah to someone, you're being mamshech Keser of Elyon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you drink water, you make a bracha. What are you doing? You're elevating the water to the makar of water. You're being mamshich Keser Elyon through the water. Same thing, fire is gvura. So what do you have? Is that you have an existence with many, many details, but it all has building blocks. So the same thing with Zman. Zman, yes, begins in Beriya, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have a spiritual source. That's called seder zmanim. That the Eibishter didn't create the world in one leap and bound. He created an orderly structure. So before he created a physical water, he created a spiritual chesed. Before he created physical time, he created conceptual time. So in Atzilus, namely Beriya of Atzilus, Beriya, the Beriya in Atzilus is the conceptual time that will be the root of the physical time in Beriya. And then Yitzir, Asiyah, and so on. Now, what that means exactly needs more explanation. What is conceptual time? But think of it like the concept of time. Just like we talked about the concept God wants something, there's the concept of the concept. And then there's the concept of the concept of the concept. So it's all levels that allow us to understand a structural process, that allow us to connect levels step by step. So first of all, there's a logic behind it. And second of all, we can retrace the steps as we connect from lower levels to higher levels. So when you take and do a mitzvah in a particular time, that's time bound, Zman Grama. You're davening Shachris, you say Krishma before Zman Krishma. You're davening Shachris in the hours you're supposed to daven. You are connecting your physical time with Ruchni's Dikka time. And there's more to say on this. Time is limited here, if I may say so. But I want to just say one more thing to help a bit. The Alter Rebbe actually brings this in Shulchan Aruch. He asks a question. The question is, he's talking there about Tikkun Chatzos, but the same thing about Zman Krishma. Or same thing about Shabbos. When we keep Shabbos, we know we connect to Hashem. The name of this mimer, actually, right? We're connecting to Ruchni's Dikka level. But when is Shabbos Lamaila? We know Shabbos in one place in the world begins where in Eretz Yisrael, when we start Shabbos in New York, in Eretz Yisrael, it's already Shabbos for 7 hours. When we're still keeping Shabbos in New York, in Eretz Yisrael, it's already Motzei Shabbos. So, since all the Ruchni's Dikka levels of Shabbos or Yom Tov, or Shema for that matter, are L'mayla Mizman, which time exactly is Shabbos? How does it work exactly? It's L'mayla Mizman. Technically speaking, Shabbos is all the time. So the Alter Rebbe answers that the Shabbos is L'mayla Mizman, but it's nimshach to each place in its time. So think of like a hovering eternal energy, and then it's channeled to each in New York time, California time, Israel time. That's what he says. More or less what he says, which is to explain how something L'mayla Mizman enters into the world of Zman. But the Samach said, the Tovkuf Samach Tes, there's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe with the Samach Tzedek's notes, where he goes deeper into this and asks the question, but how's that bridge? If it's L'mayla Mizman, how did it suddenly become Zman? So he explains with this concept of seder zmanim that there's an in-between stage. There's a stage of an eternal divine energy. There's a stage where the eternal divine energy becomes structured in seder zmanim, only in conceptual levels, like chesed, gvura. We say day 1, Sunday, is chesed. Day 2, Monday, is gvura. But chesed and gvura radiate all week long. So how do you explain that? So that's the conceptual space. Same thing with conceptual time. Chesed defines a level. Then from there will ultimately come, when it gets a physical structure, it'll be called Sunday. Just like with fire and water, chesed is not water, but when it becomes physical, it takes the shape of water. So bottom line is, there's a thing that's completely beyond time, then it gets into conceptual time, chesed, gvura, and so on. That's seder zmanim. and then from there it'll start getting the form of actual past, present, and future. Much more to be said on this, and I'll explain it as well in the coming classes. But right now, I'm going to stop here because of time limitations. Talk about time.
Even the concept for למעלה מהזמן is also לאחר הצמצום.
Yeah, for sure. Even this, of course, this is all after the tzimtzum. Before the tzimtzum is a whole different discussion, which I don't think he's going to go into the Rebbe Rasha, but I will discuss it for sure. Let's stop here. Any questions? Okay.
Sorry, Rabbi, I had a question. You said something about technically it's always Shabbos. Can you explain that to me real quickly, if you don't mind?
I'm not going to go over it again now because I don't have the time to do that.
Okay.
You could always hear the recording, or in the next classes, I'm going to discuss it more in detail. You asked me to repeat it again. That's what you're saying. You didn't get it, right?
No, what I'm saying is you were saying you weren't even explaining it. You just like threw it in. You're like, technically it's always Shabbos, and you're just like going on. You didn't elaborate, like explain that.
I thought I did elaborate. Okay, I thought I did.
Okay, I'll just listen to the recording. It's okay. Thanks.
Okay, fine. I'll go over it again. I just threw it in to the end of the class, but I don't have the time now to elaborate more. I'll do it in the coming classes. I will. It's an important topic, so. Okay, so we'll stop here. Basically, the top of page 58. I will let you know. I still have to let you know about tomorrow. I don't have a final. I'm waiting to hear something, but I will let you know if there's a class tomorrow. Friday, most likely not. But again, I'll finalize it all on the group. So I'm going to stop the recording. Top of page.
How would you
58.
define חבר מילי למעלה מהזמן?
How with what?
How would you define the Argentinian president למעלה מהזמן?
Listen, why dafke him? I mean, why not talk about all of us? When you do something that has eternal effect and not just a temporary effect, you're in a way be mamshich l'mayla mizman. I mean, I don't want to compare lahavdil, but in a way the Rebbe's effect on the world and on his chassidim and on all the people that shluchim reach and shluchas reach is like a l'mayla mizman that affects even after the Rebbe physically is not in this physical time and space. So I would say that would be applied to anyone that does something that has real eternal meaning. It's like an infinite impact. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but that's how I would put it.
Thank you.